Joining me right now is the senator himself, Senator Rand Paul. He's the ranking member on the Senate's Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. And Senator, good morning to you. Thanks so much for being here this morning. So you stuck to your guns. You had facts on your side. Anthony Fauci has been exposed. Will there be any accountability here, Senator?
You know, even the NIH admitted this week that basically they did merge viruses and they became more dangerous. That's gain of function. They gained lethality. I don't think Fauci's ever going to admit it. You've seen Merrick Garland performing live. I don't think he's ever going to prosecute him. But this is a big, big question. If this came out of the lab in Wuhan, what if a worse virus comes out of a lab? There's a professor at MIT, Kevin Esfelt, who's not a partisan, who wrote in the Washington Post recently, not a conservative journal, but he wrote that this type of research could threaten civilization. And there hasn't been one hearing. I've been asking Democrats to have a hearing on gain-of-function research so this doesn't happen again. You know, we do this research in the United States. This is a big, big question. This disease we're facing has a 1% mortality. What if we got a contagion that leaks from the lab that has a 50% mortality? They're actually doing experiments as we speak with viruses that have 50% mortality. That shouldn't be happening.
And aren't we still sending money to the EcoHealth Alliance? Aren't we still sending taxpayer dollars? I know that Anthony Fauci will be testifying again in front of you and your colleagues this upcoming Thursday. What do you want to ask him, and what can you tell us about this latest intelligence assessment of COVID-19, where they did say it was like one element assessed that it was likely a laboratory-associated incident?
Well, realize they won't even tell us that they're still funding Wuhan. We learned that through Freedom of Information Act when the Intercept got these emails and got this information. They have not been forthcoming. But what we understand is that there's a research project still with EcoHealth Alliance that goes through 2025 with Wuhan. So we're still funding the lab in Wuhan. I introduced an amendment a month and a half ago, and it passed unanimously to stop all funding to the Wuhan lab, but it has not been signed by President Biden yet and has not gone through the House. So, yes, this is a big problem. Money still flows to Wuhan, but even worse. Here's the judgment of Dr. Fauci. He continues to say, when asked, should we be funding this research? He says, yes, that's where the viruses are. We should be funding research in China. But he fails to address the question of whether or not the Chinese Communist Party, the generals in the lab, the military's involvement in the lab, whether they're to be trusted. And he fails to acknowledge that this could have come from the lab, and he continues to lie about the idea of whether gain-of-function research was going on. And, you know, his one pushback is this. He says, well, the viruses that we see could not molecularly be COVID. No one's alleging that. So he's saying something, he's pushing back with a straw man argument because we're not alleging that. We think if the virus came from the lab, guess what? The Chinese never told us the sequencing of that virus. So we don't know anything about the virus that came from the lab other than it looks like it could have been COVID-19.
Well, I mean, we don't know how long the gain-of-function research was going on before it leaked from the Wuhan lab and caused this pandemic. Could this happen again?
Yeah, and the thing is that there are worse viruses. The virus they've been using in the Chinese lab is SARS. It caused a pandemic. It's a coronavirus. It caused a pandemic in 2004, much smaller than what we have, but it has a 15% mortality. But it's not very transmissible. So the experiments they've been doing in Wuhan are taking an unknown virus from a bat cave, combining it with a virus that we know has 15% mortality, but doesn't transmit to humans well. They put them together and say, hey, wonder if we could infect some humanized mice cells. Wonder how good this new virus that doesn't exist in nature could infect humans. That's the experiment. And Dr. Fauci says, well, if they don't know in advance, it's not gain of function. My goodness, we are experimenting with something that could cause the demise of 15% of the planet. This needs to have a discussion, not one hearing. Democrats love Dr. Fauci so much that they will not have one hearing to investigate the origins of this virus.
And Joe Biden spoke with Xi Jinping several times in the last few months, and not once did the origins of COVID come up. Is he that compromised over China? Money going to him and his family and his son that he will not bring it up? I mean, what is going on that they will not bring this up?
It's hard with President Biden to know whether it's corruption or incompetence. But Dr. Quay looked at 9,000, or he looked at the WHO, looked at 9,000 samples blood from 2019. If this came from animals, Dr. Quay, who's written several good and interesting articles on this and studied the issue, said that of the 9,000 samples of blood you looked at, there should have been several hundred of them that were positive for COVID-19. They found 0. All of this points towards the lab. 80,000 animals were looked at, none of them had COVID-19. So when Dr. Fauci gets on left-wing media and says, oh, it still could have come from animals, the chances of it coming from animals are becoming very, very small, but all of the evidence is pointing towards the lab, and yet Dr. Fauci is still for funding the lab. This is a real problem. We need to get to the head of it. That's what will happen on Thursday.
I want to get your take on 2 more items, so I want to move on, but I want to show your letter that you sent to Anthony Fauci on Friday. You and 5 other GOP senators sent a letter to Fauci requesting more information about the cruel, inhumane experiments conducted on puppies. What did he do in terms of beagle puppies? It's so disgusting. I can't even talk about it very long, but it involves severing beagle puppies' vocal cords, injecting them with bacteria. What can you tell us?
Yeah, there's got to be better oversight on this. The puppies are so tortured and in such pain that they cut their vocal cords so the researchers don't have to hear them cry and bark and whine. And they apparently anesthetize them so their blink response is reduced, and then they infect their eyes with sand fleas. And, you know, it's one thing if we're going to save the planet from something, we have to test it on a few animals. But the FDA doesn't require that it be dogs. You could go to a lower animal where there's less human attachment. But the other thing is I've now introduced legislation that doesn't make it mandatory. Right now it's mandatory that there be some animal testing. I have legislation to actually make it optional. But this goes to the lack of judgment by Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci apparently thinks this kind of experiment must be necessary, but he always sides on the side of, oh, do whatever, instead of saying, well, what are the possible problems with torturing? We don't even do it in this country. He farmed it out to Tunisia, where it's probably more acceptable in Tunisia than it is here in this country. But it shouldn't happen.
I can't believe
he needs to be reviewed. But really, he needs to be out of office because just such what poor judgment or lack of judgment he has.
Well, we'll watch your hearing on Thursday. Let's real quick a word on this Biden quote unquote framework. I know the Democrats are trying to change the conversation away from Virginia. Because the Republican Glenn Youngkin is in the lead there. But we've got a graphic here on the new reconciliation framework. It's $555 billion in climate investments. It's been gutted. What can you tell us about the prospect of nothing getting done for Biden's agenda because of the disarray within the Democrats?
You know, I think it's been good that there have been some, like Senator Sinema and Manchin, who have pushed back. So it's less bad. I still can't vote for it because it's going to add at least $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion, almost $2 trillion worth of debt. It also does some funny shenanigans with accounting. It sort of says, oh, we're going to have free pre-K schooling for everyone in the country. It's really going to cost nothing. And then we're going to end it in 1 year, the funding for it. Well, none of that's really true. It's a game. And so it's going to go on and on and on. It will cost enormous amounts of money as it becomes a mandatory spending kind of item in the budget. So I think all along the Democrats have realized that it's 2 for 1. So they're not going to pass the infrastructure bill. They're holding it hostage to this bill. And I think that the progressives will get their way. The Bernie Sanders socialist wing of the party is going to get it all. There's going to be a ton of spending. But we're seeing the ramifications of this. Already 5% inflation. And the inflation this year, I think, is from last year's borrowing. We're borrowing even more this year. So I suspect inflation gets worse over the next year.
Wow. And then, of course, there's the mobs and the bullying. You were attacked yourself because your neighbor did not agree with policies. I mean, the Democrats use mobs and bullying to get their point across. They interrupted a wedding that Senator Kristen Sinema was officiating this weekend. And, of course, we know that they followed her into the bathroom, tried to get her to change her policies on this massive spending. Your thoughts on the use of mobs and bullying to get their way?
Yeah, there's got to be a better way. You know, I had 6 ribs broken, part of my lung removed. I still suffer from the pain inflicted from someone who attacked me from behind without any kind of realization that I was getting ready to be hit very hard from behind. And so it was motivated by politics. My wife and I have been attacked by a mob. Our lives were saved by the police in D.C. one evening. early one morning. But yeah, there's got to be something done about the dialogue. I have criticized and condemned people who would go in a bathroom to film Senator Sinema. I mean, I think it's abhorrent. And really, we have to arrest some of these people. We've had people trying to kill us, but we've had them, they need to be arrested.
Senator, thank you so much. Great to have you this morning, Senator Rand Paul. We're going to take a break.